For 30 years, Europe has been a sleeping giant. Military forces have shrunk dramatically since the Cold War, going from massive numbers in the 1990s to just a fraction of their military strength in 2024. This decline has even sparked light-hearted criticism from NATO allies, with comments like, "Why are the Germans only terrible at war when they are on our side?" But those days are coming to an end. The European Commission has announced a massive €800 billion plan for rearming Europe, and Germany is about to loosen its debt brake, unlocking hundreds of billions of euros for defense. And Poland is pushing to enshrine 4% of GDP defense spending into its constitution. Simply put, Europe is rearming. In this video, we'll break down the scale of this rearmament, where all the money is going, and of course, share our thoughts of whether this is actually a good thing. Let's break down the numbers and where we stand today. This table shows military spending by NATO countries in Europe. As you can see, most countries have significantly increased their budgets, surpassing the 2% of GDP target. In fact, there are only 8 countries in Europe that failed to meet this goal last year. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. The NATO spending target is expected to rise to 3% or even 3.5% this summer, signaling the start of a new arms race. The Baltic nations are at the forefront, each aiming to reach 5% of GDP for military spending in the next few years. Poland is projected to spend 4.7% this year and has announced plans to more than double its army from around 200,000 soldiers to 500,000. Meanwhile, France's President Macron has instructed his prime minister to increase defense spending from just over 2% to 3%. Even Spain and Portugal, historically among the lowest spenders, have declared their intention to hit the 2% mark. And Italy, while open to increased spending, prefers to fund it through common EU debt though. And then there are the two latest developments, an €800 billion defense initiative called Rearm Europe, alongside Germany losing its so-called debt brake to spend more on defense. Let's break these down. The EU Commission's plan to rearm Europe builds on 5 key pillars to strengthen military capabilities. The first pillar unlocks €150 billion through a new financial instrument, allowing the Commission to borrow from capital markets, issue bonds, and then lend to the member states. Member states' demand will be grouped together for large-scale EU-wide weapons procurement, ensuring better prices for missiles, artillery, ammunition, drones, and other enablers, in line with NATO goals. Crucially, 65% of this pot has to be used in order to buy European, not US. The second pillar lets EU countries spend beyond budget rules set by the Stability and Growth Pact, which normally caps deficits at 3% of GDP. With this escape clause, defense spending can go beyond these limits, giving countries more flexibility to increase military budgets in response to crises. The third pillar aims to increase incentives for defense investments. For example, the EU currently allocates cohesion funds to poorer regions for infrastructure like roads and schools, but the Commission suggests that recipient countries could choose to invest their funds in their militaries instead. The fourth pillar expands the European Investment Bank's role, ensuring more money flows into military projects while keeping finances stable. And the fifth pillar focuses on mobilizing private capital, tapping into the billions in savings held by Europeans that need to be invested within the EU. By completing the Capital Markets Union, the EU could unlock hundreds of billions in additional investment per year, strengthening the European defense industry and economy. So, that's the EU plan. But for the keen-eyed among you, where's this €800 billion coming from that keeps making the headlines? Let's hear from von der Leyen herself.
So if member states would increase their defense spending by 1.5% of GDP on average, this could create fiscal space of close to €650 billion over a period of 4 years.
Yes, this number is super misleading because all of this money will essentially come from the member states themselves. Only 150 billion euros can be borrowed from the EU through Pillar 1, while the remaining 650 billion euros would need to be raised by member states through Pillars 2 to 5, meaning they must find the funds themselves. Now, so far, these are just proposals by the European Commission and still needs to be agreed upon by the Council and some of it also by the Parliament. And this brings us to Germany, the economic powerhouse of the European Union, which has just taken a historic step in reshaping its defense policy. It is no secret that Germany hates debt. So much so that its constitution strictly limits government borrowing. However, in a landmark vote this week, lawmakers approved a constitutional change that effectively nullifies the debt brake for defense. This means that all military-related costs exceeding 1% of GDP will no longer be subject to borrowing limits. For example, 1% of GDP in 2024 is around 43 billion euros, meaning that anything above this amount can now be financed through loans. This includes Bundeswehr funding, civil defense, cybersecurity, intelligence services, and military aid to Ukraine, signaling Germany's most significant defense policy shift in years. So, I think you get the idea. Europe is gearing up to spend over €1 trillion in defense in the coming years. But this raises a crucial question. Where will all of this money actually go? And the honest answer is, we don't fully know yet. But we can look at the past as a future indicator and look at the last 4 years. In this graph, the dark yellow represents the arms imports from the US, while the lighter color shows imports from the rest of the world. As you can see, the US dominates, especially in EU countries like the Netherlands, Italy, and Sweden, as well as non-EU countries like Norway and the UK. In fact, in between 2020 and 2024, the US supplied 64% of all arms purchased by NATO's European members, a significant increase from the previous 5 years. And this trend isn't likely to change anytime soon. Take the F-35 fighter jet, for example, one of the most sought-after military aircraft in Europe. On this map, you can see the deliveries and open orders for the fighter jet across the continent. That's a lot, right? But the issue is that there are no real alternatives. According to multiple defense ministers, the F-35 outperforms its competitors in speed, stealth, and radar capabilities. And while the European-made options, like the French Rafale and the Swedish Gripen exist, they still don't match the US-made fighter in overall capability, despite being cheaper in the long run. Europe is working on its own next-generation fighter jets though, but they're years, if not decades away. 2 major European programs are currently underway. Tempest, a joint project by the UK, Italy, and Japan, and their Future Combat Air System, led by Spain, France, and Germany. However, even if, and that is a very big if, these projects succeed, the earliest realistic delivery date is 2040. And this is just one example. Across multiple defense sectors, Europe is still heavily dependent on US gear, making it almost unavoidable that a large portion of this €1 trillion defense budget will flow straight to American arms manufacturers. Now, I am a bit worried about where this money will actually go, and my concern is fourfold. First, short-term thinking. Yes, in the near future, Europe will need to buy a lot of American equipment. But we also need to invest in our long-term aspirations to become more independent. Developing a European competitor to the F-35 might be more expensive than simply buying the American jet. But this isn't just about cost. It's about building expertise, creating jobs, and developing critical defense infrastructure. The long-term benefits of producing long-term military technology in Europe far outweighs the short-term savings of relying on imports. Second, going at it alone. No single European country has the size or budget to be good at everything, like the US or China. So instead of each country trying to do everything on its own, European countries should specialize. The frontline states like Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland could focus on building strong ground forces with troops, tanks, and artillery. Germany, as the largest economy, could maintain both land and air capabilities. Countries further back, like the Netherlands, Spain, and Portugal, could prioritize fighter jets and missile systems to support frontline nations, while France and the UK could focus on nuclear deterrence, and Italy on naval power. While this would never resemble a single unified military like Russia or the US, it would be far more effective than 27 separate small-scale forces trying to do everything at once. Third, I'm worried that we won't buy together. If each EU country purchases its own military equipment separately, it will drive up costs, slow down production, and create a fragmented, non-standardized military. This is why Pillar 1 of the EU Commission's defense plan is crucial. By pooling demand and committing to long-term orders, European companies can plan ahead, scale production, and build the necessary factories right here in Europe. And fourth, there could be a potential new euro crisis. Some countries are already deeply in debt, and taking on even more, especially at this kind of scale, could lead to serious financial instability. One way to avoid this is by allowing targeted borrowing for countries that can handle it, or by introducing EU defense bonds to spread the financial burden. But this is something that is not liked by many member states, and we'll explore it further in future videos. So, do I think defense spending is necessary? Yes, I do. But as I've said in previous videos, there's too much focus on just the money, and not enough in fixing the structural problems that Europe faces today. Wouldn't we be far better off if we pooled our resources from the start and build a coordinated European defense strategy? We've made an entire video about this, so check it out if you are interested. And to support us further, consider joining us on Patreon. Every contribution helps us bring you more in-depth discussions on Europe's future. Thank you so much to our presidents, Jan, Sjoukje, Kristen, Peter, HVD, BJ, Unite Europe, Stefan, and Mr. Probot.